Thank you so much for your kind introduction. And because obviously we are under a certain time constraint here, we are going to be moving very briskly, so please follow me. And first and foremost, I wanted to warmly welcome our distinguished panelists and all our guests, including friends, old and new, who are here today. I also wanted to thank the organizers of the Art Basel Salon for hosting this event. This panel features distinguished collectors from Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. Dr. Zuzana Bartošová, curator of the first Slovak investment group collection in Bratislava, Mr. Gregory Jankilewicz, entrepreneur, founder, and owner of the Zwierciadlo Foundation in Warsaw, and the collection manager, Mrs. Katarzyna Wąs, as well as Mr. Zsolt Somloi, head of the media agency, member of the Russia and Eastern Europe Acquisitions Committee at the Tate, London, a collector based in Budapest with his wife Katalin Spengler. And although Mrs. Grażyna Kulczyk, entrepreneur, founder and owner of the Art Stations Foundation in Poznań, Poland, member of the Modern Women Fund Committee at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, is not here with us, however, she has provided us with the statement, so we will be able to present part of her collection. Same for Mr. Jan Svietlik, entrepreneur and owner of the Milan Dobeš Museum in Bratislava, leading collector in Czech Republic. Today's moderator is Mrs. Kasia Redzisz, senior curator at the Tate, Liverpool, who also runs the Tate Russia and Eastern Europe Acquisitions Committee and is responsible for the Tate collection strategy for this region. Thank you for being part of this event. We dedicate this panel to two art professionals who passed away this spring. James Farber, curator of the Global Conceptualism, Points of Origin, 1950s to 1980s, a breakthrough exhibition at the Queen's Museum of Art in 1999. And to our dear friend, Professor Piotr Piotrowski, former director of the Institute of Art History at the University in Poznań, and also curator and the author of The Avant-Garde in the Shadow of Yalta, Art in East Central Europe, 1945 to 1989. Today's presentation is based on research and material created by these two intellectuals, as well as Dr. Zuzana Bartošová, exclusively for the Slovak section, and then Margit Rowell, Bożena Kowalska, Laszlo Beke, Loran Hegi, Luisa Nader, and the Central European Art Database with notes from Zsolt Somloi for the Hungarian section. Artworks illustrated in this material come from all noted collections. Our mission today is twofold: to explore and get a grasp of the groundbreaking art from East Central Europe of the 60s and 70s, specifically from Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and highlights from Czech Republic, and to pay attention to the revival of private collection and private collecting in this region and the opportunity it brings as a platform for dialogue. We would like to accentuate the diversity of the artists of these decades and to focus on the extent of the contribution from the East Central European region to the evolution of conceptual art and the neo-avant-garde movement. Ultimately, we hope that today's event will encourage new interpretations and a closer analysis of artistic phenomena in East Central Europe through private collections. And now I'm going to briskly walk you through a timeline, and then we are going to focus on numerous artists which will bring obviously closer to your mind the idea about the contribution of their contribution to conceptual art and the new avant-garde. From 1945 to 1989, East Central Europe was a geographical and political entity that included Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Bulgaria, which under the Yalta Treaty remained more or less dominated by the Soviet Union. The communist system differed from country to country. While one was entering a liberal phase, the other might have been on a much stricter path. Artistically, the 60s and 70s brought diversity and new trends. Despite an intellectual isolation, major tendencies framing the art of East Central Europe were mainly parallel to the events in the West and were a departure point and a source of inspiration for many. Different forms of expression became dominant in each country depending on its legacy of pre-World War II European avant-garde. Polish art of the 60s draws from the tradition of geometrical abstraction and constructivism. Strong, diverse conceptual tendencies in Polish art emerged in the mid-60s and paved the path to the neo-avant-garde scene that would strongly develop in the 70s. Major discussions of Polish art of the 60s and 70s developed through independent institutions and galleries, like Foxal in Warsaw, Accumulatory 2 in Poznań, and Repassage also in Warsaw. Artist happenings and performances flourished. One phenomenon in the Polish art scene was a strong presence of women, like Alina Szapocznikow, Ewa Partum, Zofia Kulik, Maria Pinińska-Bereś, and Natalia L.L. Their approach to conceptualism, body art, and experiment with mediums gave voice to feminism. Because of the possibility of some international exchanges, it is uniquely Poland in the 70s became the center of intellectual tourism behind the Iron Curtain and a substitute for international contacts for neighboring countries. In Hungary, the tradition of constructivism was not strongly defined. The 60s saw some experimentation in autonomy of art, neo-constructivism, and variations on pop art and new figurative tendencies. An important element in the scene was the influence of hard-edge, minimalist, and color-filled paintings. It is in the Hungary, however, that we observe very dynamic developments leading up to the rise of the neo-avant-garde tendencies. In particular, action art, happening and performance art, and conceptualism, as in works by Geza Perneczki and Tamas Szantiobi. In 1960, Czechoslovakia, and I'm going to obviously draw your attention to the fact that at that time it was one country, and only as of January 1st, 1993, it became Slovakia and the Czech Republic. There were trends like new figuration, pop art, neo-constructivism, and individual modifications thereof. Artists also started to focus on action and conceptual art. Many artists previously in art informel were drawn to neo-constructivism. Slovak Milan Dobeš was the first artist in Czechoslovakia to introduce such tendencies in the mid-60s with kinetic art incorporating light. Alex Młynarczyk and Stanisław Filko created the first conceptual works, but it was Młynarczyk who was the only Slovak artist to join a broader circle of Parisian new realists. The artist was using mannequins, ready-made objects from consumer culture. Młynarczyk is also known as an initiator and co-creator of HAPSOC, Happening and Society Manifesto in 1965, along with Stano Filko and Zita Kostrova. Nevertheless, it was also Jana Żelibska, Slovak as well, who at some point caught the eye of Pierre Rastané, as he was the only one who had strong contacts with artists in what was then Czechoslovakia. While responding to the neo-avant-garde tendencies, the artists of the 60s, such as Slovak Julius Koller and Peter Bartoš, that created dematerialized form of an in-situ art such as events. Some Czechs at that time had more of, let's say, post-constructive and conceptual leanings, as visible in works by Karel Malich, specifically in his objects related to the design of the utopian architecture and his later whimsical wire sculptures. Same for Milan Grigar and his 1965 sonic drawings, where the artist started to pursue the relationship between drawing and sound. The explosion of creativity came to a halt in 1972, 4 years after the 1968 invasion by Warsaw Pact armies. The Congress of the Association of Slovak Visual Art denounced everything contradicting socialist realism, which led to the creation of an unofficial scene. The Czechs were in the same situation. In other words, to use, let's say, more graphic words, nuclear winter has started for the creative circles. And now we are going to focus on selected artists and very specific elements of their work. From major discoveries to innovative takes and transient aspects, we will see an originality within three groups: conceptual art, new realism, and performance art, which offers a refreshing and somewhat revised perspective on both decades. There will be some aspects that will seem familiar, but will be different because of their geopolitical context, and I will point out to that. I will start with the Polish artist, who's very hard to define actually, or let's say to put him in a single draw. and this is Wojciech Fangor, who evolved in isolation from international artists in the 50s when social realism was the only accepted art in Poland. At the time, he was a figurative painter, poster artist, and exhibition designer. However, already by 1957, he made a significant discovery. From a series of his own unfinished paintings in which the primary layer of paint formed a sfumato-like surface without the borders that was described later as two-dimensional field in which blurred edges dissolve the distinction of colors and form it into a synoptic pulsating configuration. He called this positive illusory space. At that time, there was only one other artist which painted that way, and I'm relating obviously to a certain style to do with the edges, and it was Mark Rothko. Fangor's positive illusory space came in many shapes of pulsating circles, squares, and waves, which he painted until 1975. Fangor's other major achievement is tied to his 1958 Warsaw Salon, where he realized so-called spatial studies. Fangor became, therefore, a pioneer of the environment, ahead of American and European art, where the practice came about only in late 60s and early 70s. Fangor identified this as a separate discipline in 1959 interview and in 1960 co-written manifesto, which he later gave to Clement Greenberg. The biggest group of works by Fangor are in the collection of Mr. Jankilewicz. Regarding conceptual art, and we will move, this is the view of the exhibition from Amsterdam relating to the spatial studies. I apologize for missing the image. And we are going to move to another artist. And this time it is Roman Opalka, painter and philosopher. The importance of his creation lies in the structuring of the so-called one work. Opalka's work consists of painting, time-concurrent photo portrait, and the recording of his voice announcing the numbers, with numbers painted in white starting in 1965, disappearing into an ever whiter background in consecutive paintings. The voice documenting the project becomes the only proof of the numbers' existence. Thus, the numerical sequences pronounced by the artist symbolize the liberation of numerics from canvas to audio. The mystical process of this dematerialization introduces a totally unique spiritual element in conceptualism. And the significant groups of Opalka's works are in Grażyna Kulczyk collection and Mr. Jankilewicz collection. Another one who aimed to reconfigure art through a defined program was Ryszard Winiarski, key representative of indeterminism in Poland. His thinking process exhibits conceptual elements right on the heels of conceptualism in Western Europe. In 1966, he proposed a mathematical approach in which statistics, game theory, and chance offered a framework. He created complex chance-based structural reliefs and also some kinetic and multicolor works. And multicolor works, interestingly enough, are in Jan Swietlik collection. Further development in the systematization of art creation can be seen in the work of Hungarian conceptualist Dora Maurer. Starting in the early 70s, in the span of 10 years, she moved from experimenting in printmaking to conceptual photography, structural films, and process-based drawings. Movement and place changing is her signature. Later works focus on mathematic relations via processes like folding, displacement, and distortion. Her emphasis on fluid processes and explorations of the artistic language in a direct and elemental form earned her international recognition. And the large part of the collection consists of Dora Maurer's works, and the collection belongs to Mr. Zsolt, Somloi, and Katalin Spengler. Moving on, let's focus on sculptors. And here we have Maria Bartošová, a recently rediscovered Slovak artist, whose non-figurative approach in post-minimalist style is based on biomorphism, principle of bionics, and fundamental laws of physics. She created her signature vocabulary via direct incorporation of natural materials and physics observations, like forces of gravity and weight, pouring, repouring, and recasting. This involved the casting of plaster and rubber in the early 70s. In 1968, however, she was constructing aluminum geometrical reliefs. Later, she pioneered the tactile sculptures for children with impaired vision. And here, Maria Bartošová is very well represented in the first Slovak investment group collection. In terms of avant-garde expression related to art centering around the body, we will focus on Jana Želibská, also Slovak conceptual artist and participant in the actions in the 60s and in the then Czechoslovakia. Her early works show influences of French New Realism. She was also the only one of her generation who openly dealt with sex and eroticism in Slovakia. She commented, ironically, being a proto-feminist, on the male perspective of the female. Early on, she also criticized a lack of intimacy in the society relating to sex. This especially is visible in her series of monumental female nudes, reduced into the form of a sign with decorative genital symbols. Želibská also should be acknowledged for her performance, action, and environmental art. And I want to specifically to draw your attention to the later series called Story on the Lake from 1977. It is because, paired up with Anna Mendieta, gives us a very interesting perspective on what has been happening in the 70s. And now we must mention Alina Szapocznikow. And the Jana Želibská is also here represented in depth by the first Slovak investment group collection. And now we must mention Alina Szapocznikow, one of the most original post-war sculptors. Her use of materials like polyester and polyurethane sets her apart as a radical artist whose personal history allows for distinctive input in body art. Her multiplied body parts in tinted polyester often illustrate an intimate relationship with her terminal illness, which she eroticized to some degree. Her body casts form exceptional portraits where memory, identity, and history are fused and left behind as a shed skin. They provide a new dimension in portraiture and personal narrative. The artist whose practice strongly built on exposing and exploring the body is Natalia L.L. Her philosophy is rooted in feminism in the 60s and 70s. She was one of the first to criticize the avoidance of sensuality in conceptual art in Poland. Between 72 and 75, she began a series of films and photographs she called consumer and post-consumer culture. In consumer art, she also refers to pop culture imagery, where consumption and erotic motifs are often paired. And now we are going to emphasize on performance, which is evident in Hungarian art. This is Tamás Sántioby, who created the first happening in Budapest in 1966. Sántioby, a poet and a cartoonist, participated in the first Fluxus concert in 1969 with Miklos Erdely. His conceptual works and the politically involved works by Geza Pernecki provide a valuable account of metaphors relating to the Prague Spring. Geza Pernecki, at the beginning of 1970s, continued as a conceptual artist, involving photography. Here we have particularly poignant examples of the so-called mini-concepts. And the mini-concepts and the conceptual photography by the artists are very well represented in the Zsolt, Somloi, and Katalin Spengler collection. But what I wanted to mention, that what is however important, is that the first attempts of male art in the region can be traced to his short messages and paper cuttings. He was also a male art theoretician. What was a mundane action of sending a letter in the West had connotations equal to attempts at the preservation of basic human rights, freedom of expression. The strategies were thus artistic, but also those of freedom fighters and conspirators. East Central European artists did participate somewhat in the international dialogue in the art of the 60s and 70s. Here we must mention some exhibitions of significance. Just one more minute. The solo show of Wojciech Fangor at the Guggenheim Museum in New York in 1970, the participation of Jana Želibská in the Paris Biennale of Young Artists in 1973, and the Biennale in Tokyo in 1970, where works by Karl André, Solluit, Stanisław Kolibal, and Edward Krasiński were shown together in the legendary Between Men and Matter exhibition. The end of communism in 1989 created a post-Soviet landscape on many levels, political, cultural, and social. The emergence of a market for art and the rise of private art collections in the region seemed to be much needed, if overlooked, narrative about the transition to democracy and the emergence of the civil society and a free market. And ladies and gentlemen, in this context, private collectors in East Central Europe create history. Their collections allow for the re-evaluation of the major contributions of avant-garde artists, and their individual biographies and actions create and form the history of growth and progress. We feel particularly pleased to have an opportunity to talk about these collections today. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paulina, for this very dense presentation, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. Maybe I'll move on quickly to some questions. I know that Paulina has a statement from one of the collectors she mentioned before to read later on, so maybe I thought that we will start with a very basic and very generic question about your collections and how would you characterize their profile program, how do you make your selections? Zsolt.
Yeah, thank you. We started collecting in 1992 with very classical stuff. Our first contemporary piece we bought was in 1996. And then we start to open abroad to visit art fairs. The first international piece we bought was actually a Tony Craig piece in 2001. We bought it accidentally in Budapest. Until that, we continue to collect international art and Hungarian neo-avant-garde from the 70s, and also those contemporary Hungarian artists who has the heritage or use the heritage of the 1970s masters. Some 5 years ago, we opened to the region because I think the regional context is far more interesting. So we start to buy contemporary former Yugoslavian, Romanian, Polish, Czech artists, also Russian artists, together with international levels. And we're not even collecting oil on canvas, but more video works or installations, so for example, Tony Ursler or Tatsuo Miyajima, or the regional artists. We have very nice pieces from Eva Kočatkova or Irvin, the Slovenian artist group, so this is a kind of broader concept, besides also the local art scene. The collection today is somewhere like 600 pieces.
Okay, thank you. And Grzegorz, could you talk about yours? Because I think it's also its scope goes beyond regional scope of Polish art, and also it goes across 20th century rather than just post-war.
First of all, I would like to say good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And personal for Kasia, I want to say thank you for giving me a chance and opportunities to be today. And say something about, from collector side. Of course, after Paulina, very difficult to say anything because she said everything what I want to say, she said already. But for me, personally, it's a big, big pleasure to be with art. Generally, we see what's going on because some artists, what we're talking about, Wojtek Fagode, a great artist, great period what he did, solo exhibition in Guggenheim Museum, 72. And this is my favorite artist in Poland. I started to collect 20 years ago. Still get sometimes for the market because he's painting in the United States a lot. He spent maybe like 35 years around New York and Connecticut. He was young, worked very hard. And now we see this period of time, especially the 60s, for me, it's one of the best periods of him. He's still alive. He's a very nice person. And I collect him art and I talk with him. This is really big pleasure for me. And especially this part of the world, in Eastern Europe, I'm sure this is all this work undervaluated today. But in the future, I think, not because it's like what we see today, what's happened. Young art is very, very expensive. But expensive means, for me, This is value of the artist. And what we do, we collect. Few collectors here collect long time ago. And today we see the value grows, and we are very happy. Not because we collect the wellness. This is something like much more than wellness. This is something like a value, what we believe it, what we choose it, and we're happy with this. Thank you so much. And Kasia, sorry, I think I had too long talking, sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask you, although I think the statement about the value is quite a controversial one, but let's not go into that yet. Could you, because you have over 50 paintings by Van Gogh, is that something that you do, go in depth with like individual artists for your collection in general?
Kasia, I collect different region, different period of time in different region also, like, you know, like French period of the École de Paris. I like Russian avant-garde, and we see where they come the next generation, like Van Gogh. And you know, I don't know how many paintings I have. Van Gogh, no idea. Maybe this question would be for Kasia, who represent foundation, and maybe give you a chance to say something.
You want me to say something about it?
No, I think we have a half of the picture. So maybe we will just go to Paulina, because I know that you have the statement of one of the collectors to read. So maybe we will do that, and then I will ask Zuzana to introduce the investment bank collection.
So I have a pleasure to read a statement, Creative Spirit Has No Borders, by Grażyna Kulczyk. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts into my private collection of contemporary art. When I look back to where I started as a collector and where I am today, I realize how the collection functions as my personal timeline. It reflects my growth as a whole person. Culture can't be bought, but it can be learned. It's through that experience of discovering that we acquire the knowledge to sustain and extend a more creative future. Being Polish and growing up in the country as devastated by World War II, the tensions that evolved out of being a part of Soviet-controlled East Bloc region wasn't easy, to say the least. This external situation wouldn't seem at first glance to be conducive for collecting anything apart from hope. Yet, it was due to this environment that I was able to build upon my entrepreneurial skills that would eventually afford me both the means and the vision to begin my collection. My entrepreneurial philosophy can be summed up in a principle. The ratio of art to business should be 50-50, regardless of whether a project takes place in Poznan, New York, or London. The principle provides order and balance in all dimensions of my life. Poland in the 60s and 70s was a culture in total transition. The artistic emphasis was on creating art with whatever materials were available, but it wasn't about preserving what had been made. One of the cornerstones that I built my collection from was a personal need to preserve the best works from this period as means to capture this unparalleled artistic dialogue that was evolving from this region of the world. It was a unique place and time in the history of Europe. The social and cultural conditions in Poland from 1945 to 1989 were radically different from those of the West. We only now are beginning to understand and appreciate the importance of these early conceptual interpretations that grew and shifted to meet new political realities. I use my collection as a way to integrate artists from dissimilar political situations in order to show that the creative spirit has no borders. One of my hopes is to build a cultural bridge that interlocks these multiple disciplines through their conceptual leanings. I think of it as an expansive wheel where I use my Polish art as the hub and the spokes are the other brothers worldwide. This was most evident in my exhibition Everybody is Nobody for Somebody and the Santander Bank Foundation, which took place in Madrid in 2014. Think of it as an imaginary theater where Roman Opalka introduced Donald Judd to Edward Krasiński, while on the other hand you have the gender politics of Alina Szapocznikow and Zofia Kulik interacting with Jenny Holzer and Valier Export. The primary goal of my collection is use art as a grand stage that engages in a dialogue between the best artists emerging from East Central European countries with those of their Western counterparts. History will eventually reveal how important East Central European art was in the development of conceptual art. My aim is to use my collection as a vehicle to inspire as well as to introduce a new perspective where somebody is no longer a nobody for everybody. And a special thanks also goes to Mr. Timothy Persson, adjunct professor at the Aalto University School of Arts and Design and Architecture in Helsinki, Finland, who has curated the show Everybody's Nobody for Somebody at the Santander Bank Foundation last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina, for reading this. And that actually brings me to the investment bank collection, both because of the business model, but also because of your mission, which I think is a bit similar in terms of including Slovak artists in the international discourse. So, Zuzana, could you speak a bit?
Je voudrais seulement saluer
sorry, it will be translated.
Mesdames et messieurs, excusez-moi, je parle plutôt français, et car notre discours est en anglais, je vous présente ma collègue, Madame Bourrian, qui peut me traduire. Merci.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry, my French is much better than my English, so I will make my presentation in French, and I ask my colleague to translate for me in English.
Tak já budu mluvit trošku česky, abyste slyšeli jiný jazyk, a paní to přeloží.
A teď trošku and now also another sorry. And now also another language, so you can hear a little bit of Czech and you will have the translation.
Tak, naše sbírka má docela jinou historii a je to vlastně sbírka, která je na úrovni největšího muzea výtvarného umění na Slovensku, na úrovni Národní galerie.
Our collection has a little bit another history, and I must admit that our collection is of the value of a National Gallery collection.
Já jsem první porevoluční ředitelka Národní galerie.
I was the first director of the National Gallery in Slovakia, in Bratislava, after the revolution.
Něžná revoluce.
After the Velvet Revolution.
Tak, a když jsem skončila svou misi, tak mě oslovila první slovenská investiční skupina, abych mohla, jestli bych nedělala kolekci.
And when I finished my post of the director, the first investment company, Slovak company, did ask me if I could build up a collection for them of Slovak artists.
A mojí prioritou bylo tehda i potom, abych vynořila ze stínu ty zakazované autory, kteří dělali tu síť neoficiální výtvarní scény.
And for me the priority was to collect artists who were the forbidden artists during the communist time and who were developing this special line of non-official theme.
Není to jenom politické hledisko, je to i umělecké hledisko. Byli to lidi, kteří se zdráhali dělat socialistický realismus a raději přijali v civilná povolání.
It was not only a political statement, but it was also an artistic statement. These artists did not want to join the socialistic realism, and they preferred to have normal jobs than being an official artist.
Tak tyhle evropští umělci vlastně jsou prioritou i sbírky první slovenské investiční skupiny.
So this type of artists are the priority of the collection of the first Slovak investment company.
Okay, and may I just ask you, since you've mentioned the state public collection, and you're a curator yourself, and I think all the other collections are actually curated by their owners, could you speak a bit more about your role? Is it any different than your role at the National Museum in Bratislava?
Tak já myslím, že ten historik a kritik umění se dívá trošku jinak na ty priority.
I think that an art historian and a critic looks in a different way on the priorities of the collection.
Alespoň na Slovensku.
at least in Slovakia.
Já jsem musela přesvědčovat ty majitele sbírky, že to, co já vybírám, i když tomu moc nerozumí, že má to uměleckou hodnotu.
My biggest job was to convince the first Slovak investment group to collect these artists, even if they did not like them, even if they did not understand them, that it makes sense to collect them.
Oni mi věřili a po 20 letech teď vidí, že to má i tu další hodnotu, nejenom tu přidanou uměleckou, ale i tu ekonomickou.
They were believing me, and now after 20 years they can see that this collection has not only the artistic value but also the commercial value, added value.
So your approach would be the same as curating in the State Gallery and in public institutions when you did that?
Ano. Já jsem ze stejného hlediska vlastně dělala sbírku Slovenské národní galerie a přesvědčila pak majitele sbírky privátní, aby mě akceptovali, což oni udělali.
Yes, I was collecting in the same way for the National Gallery from the same point of view, and then I convinced the owners of the first Investment Slovak group to collect the same artist, and the approach was the same.
I'm asking about that because I think there is some interesting things going on now in the region around this intersection of private and public sector. And as much as all your collections are private, I was going to ask about also the kind of public mission you involved with and public programs. And I know that all of you have very different activities beyond private collecting. Could you speak a bit more about your involvement, and then I think we can go around the table once again.
So we have basically two fields beyond the kind of traditional involvement, then lending pieces to exhibitions and supporting publications, that kind of stuff. We try to put contemporary Hungarian art on the agenda on an international level through the Tate and the Pompidou acquisition committees, which is a great exchange of knowledge. So we could learn a lot about the regional markets and about other artists and what's the situation in the neighborhood. And on the other hand, and don't mislead me, that we can also educate you and other people like yourself what was behind the Iron Curtain or what kind of stuff going on. And in our case, there was, and this event closed 2 weeks ago, that due to the quite difficult Hungarian situation and all the drying out the government funds or the public funds for progressive contemporary art, and is going to happen in the last 5 years. Some young curators from the ex-Ludwig Museum and from other places think that it was enough complaining, that someone has to do something. And they organize a big event in Budapest, which were called Off Biennial. Off because it was off on the public stuff. And finally, over 18 months, very hard work, they could realize this project. And there was 2 criteria of this project. One was on a very professional level, and the other one was that it was forbidden to have any public money. So, for example, if you choose a place like a theater, it was a private theater, you could have a project, but it was run by a local government or local municipality or by the Ministry of Culture. It was a forbidden place. So finally, there were 160 places, like a plant in Budapest, private places. So for example, Ulaj, who just recently saw his show, he had an exhibition there, Eva Kočatkova, so it was a kind of regional event as well. And my wife was the head of the foundation committee, or that she was the head, fundraiser. And I did help on the communication and websites and publicity for this event.
Yeah, so it was 24,000 visitors as far as I am concerned.
24,000 we had in the first month, but finally over 6 weeks we have 35,000 visitors, which, I mean, it's not a big number if you compare to Art Basel visitor, but if you compare that the Budapest Ludwig Museum has between 60,000 to 70,000 visitors over a year, I think it's an extraordinary stuff. And it was like pure public money. We also have some support with the George Soros Foundation and the Erste Foundation and the Norwegian Fund. So that was the three kind of public support. But two-thirds of the budget came together from Hungarian private collectors and Hungarian private passionate people for art. So I'm honestly, we are very proud that we could realize this event in Budapest.
Quite an impressive initiative. There was a lot of steps leading to that prior to the Biennale. You've been active for over 20 years. I would like to direct the same question to Katarzyna and Grzegorz. And it's probably Katarzyna who will speak, because I know that the collection is very private. Nevertheless, you're working closely together on establishing a structure for support for public institutions and maybe making some parts of the collections public. Could you talk about your plans?
Yes, the Polish part of the collection is under the care of Zwierciadlo Foundation. And as foundation, we're cooperating now with Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. We're planning to publish some books about Stanisław Zamecznik and also about Wojciech Fangor. And we also planning to make some exhibition about Fangor's site-specific works for public space. And yes, and this is our plan with museum. And we also like to open our exhibition space, maybe open for publicity. But we're talking about the Polish part of the collection from Warsaw.
Okay, and Paulina, I wanted to bring you back to the stage because I know that you, there is a bit of choreography going on here.
I don't need this. I have my mic. Sorry.
We agreed that you will be speaking on behalf of the Art Station Foundation by Grażyna Kulczyk, which in the city, it is based in Poznań, really fulfills the role of a public institution. So I think that's also an interesting example of the kind of, not collaboration, because there's no public partner on the other side necessarily, but of taking over the role and kind of filling in the gap in the system.
I need to say that, yes, indeed, it's an extraordinary institution. It is because over past 10 years, it actually hosted numerous of international events which drew attention to other international museums, but at the same time sustain a very interesting way of operating. It's because of the founders' philosophy, the 50-50 philosophy, that allowed for actually open doors free of charge to all the visitors visiting not only the old brewery, but everybody that wanted to see the exhibition. And what is very valuable specifically today, and when you compare to the, let's say, even tickets to museums such as Museum of Modern Art or Guggenheim, where you have to pay $20 to $25, here truly exhibitions of international standard are open to the public, and you can walk in with your entire family and at the same time enjoy the exhibition, have a guided tour, and on top of everything, there are special events which accompany each exhibition, either documentary films or special talks and symposia, where the doors are open to those who are interested. And at the same time, I would say that there is a direct education and indirect education. It's because you can be spontaneous, meaning you simply walk in and you enjoy art. Therefore, I would say that certain barrier is melted within the structure of the Art Station Foundation and being the heart of the complex, which at the same time, obviously, is a commercial complex which takes care of the infrastructure, of the covering of the cost of the infrastructure of the foundation. So indeed, it's a very successful and a unique situation.
Yeah, the organization also exchanges shows with international institutions rather than private organizations, but there is another layer of promoting the artists from the collection and from the region through those activities, namely the loans. And here, Zuzana, I know that the investment bank group has a very kind of dynamic part of activities devoted to arranging international loans. Can you speak about some exhibitions planned for the future where we can see the artists from the collection?
Tak chtěla bych říct, že chtěla bych trošku navázat na to, co už bylo předtím řečeno, jaký je rozdíl mezi privátní a veřejnou sférou v institucích, které sbírají současné umění. A sice bylo velice dlouhé období, kdy vládli na Slovensku populisté, kdy Slovenská národní galerie udělala jednu výstavu za 10 let v zahraničí a první slovenská investiční udělala asi 12.
I would like to add to the discussion which was already discussed before about the collaboration between the private and the public sector. And there was a period of time when Slovakia was very populistic. And so the National Gallery organized only one exhibition within 10 years abroad. And the first investment group did something like 14 or 15 exhibitions over that period of time.
A my jsme vlastně vystavovali, mám ty partnery, jsme známé a kolegy, s kterými udrží kontakt v městských a národních galeriích v té střední Evropě, tak využila jsem tady to pro privátní kolekci na úrovni Národní galerie a na pro slovenské umění vůbec.
So we were mainly exhibiting in other Central European organizations, public organizations, that means national galleries or institutions.
And any plans for international shows that are going to tour? Do you have any plans for international shows which are going to tour now, where we can see the works?
Tak momentálně to prestižní dílo Jany Želibské, která Paulina prezentovala, ta Venuše, putuje Spojenými státy na velké výstavě International Pop a momentálně je teda tam. Kde to je?
So in this moment, Jana Želibská, the very famous work Paulina was presenting, the Venus, is on a traveling exhibition in Minneapolis until the 6th of September 2015, and then it's going to the Dallas Museum of Art and at the end Philadelphia Museum of Art.
No, tak to můžeš pak přeložit to, co ještě nás čeká. No.
And if I may, we are also planning an exhibition in the House of European History in Brussels with Juraj Meliš. And
a dále plánujeme velkou výstavu společnou s Českou.
So the artists are out there traveling in America. I've seen a couple of names mentioned here on the fairs, both upstairs and downstairs. I would like to kind of finish with a question to Paulina first, because she conceived this panel before opening to the floor. The title of the panel is The New Era, and I found it quite a big title. Can you say what you meant and how do you refer to that title?
I think that what is very important, that obviously before the war, in all respectful countries, there were collectors, but all of them were buying old masters. And only one, maybe, or very, very few, specifically in Czech Republic. Mr. Kramaš was buying Picasso and the Braque, but also other Cubist Czech painters. In Poland, maybe we could look at some of the collectors who were actually pharmacists, and they had more of interest of the let's call it contemporary art at a time. However, this was never such an important element in collecting as it is now. And I think that also the new era, it's because it is with such force, such abilities to actually change the environment, which is rather unseen in this region. It's because of all the turbulences it went through. Therefore, past 25 years provided a very interesting ground where people with initiative and abilities to understand the importance of art, specifically contemporary art, in the life of the society, contribute in an unprecedented way. And this, I think, marks or warrants the description, the new era. And we hope that it will not only last, but obviously will take us all to another level.
Zsolt, would you agree that it's like collecting in the region for the past, let's say, 10 years, from your experience? Does it change?
I think so, as I think the 70s or this neo-avant-garde or conceptualism getting more and more fashionable. So my point of view or my personal statement why I like this period is twofold. One is that I do believe that not every decade is as important. So there are peaks or there are times when then something was in the air besides love. So for me in Hungary, 1906 till 1912 and 1968 till 1976 was this kind of two peaks when it was something very important happening on the cultural and on the visual art life. And the other thing was that for me, these artists and mainly the photographical works are extremely strong because they were very free. Because at that time, there were never no galleries, sorry to say. There was no commercial pressure. You don't have to produce art because you do it for your own living. You don't have to beg for government or public money because what you did was forbidden. That's why most of the artworks has very cheap materials. For example, photography, 60mm films, mail art, and this kind of stuff instead of huge installation or something with industrial background. So that's the two things that makes myself very important this period.
Now a new era, like these days? Changes on the market, changes in how you buy art?
I think it has something with the people or don't mislead. I'm not against the globalization as it is, but behind the Iron Curtain, if you want your people to get a bus, you have to produce a bus. Today you can buy a bus, if you take what I mean. So if you want an really good art, you have to do it because you were behind the Iron Curtain, although there were some connections between, very strong connections, and also very strong connection within the region. Now, for me, a lot of artists are more lazy than these old masters in the 70s, because you have to be very actively has to go and get the knowledge and do something which was very important for you.
So certainly a new era for artists. Yeah. I still don't know if for the collectors. I think we have 5 more minutes for questions to the public. No, we don't. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.